Yes, start in 5.
Namaste and greetings. I, Samprikta Banerjee, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI Web Policy Talk. We are gathered today for a panel discussion on New India's economic transformation and Union Budget 2024-25. This deliberation is a part of IMPRI fifth annual series of thematic deliberations and analysis of Union Budget 2024-25, which is a series of panel discussions on crucial key policy issues and Union Budget 2024-25 involving more than 100 thematic distinguished experts and research team members. This discussion is organized by the Center for the Study of Finance and Economics, CSFE, IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, New Delhi. As a part of IMPRI Web Policy Talk series, The State of the Economy, Econ Dialogue. Now let me introduce the esteemed gathering. Our chair for the session is Professor Mukul Asherji, Visiting Distinguished Professor, IMPRI, former Professor Lee Kuan V, School of Public Policy, National University of Singapore, NUS. We welcome you, sir. Today's deliberation comprises of an excellent distinguished panel of experts who will be sharing their expertise, which includes Professor A. Amarendra Reddy Ji, Joint Director, School of Crop Health Policy Support Research, SCHPSR, ICAR National Institute of Biotic Stress Management, NIBSM Raipur, Visiting Senior Fellow, IMPRI, Dr. Radhika Pandey Ji, Senior Fellow, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, NIPFB, New Delhi, Visiting Senior Fellow, IMPRI. Professor Prabir Deji, Professor, Research and Information Systems for Developing Countries, RIS, New Delhi. Professor Yamini Agarwal Ji, Director, Bharati Vidyapeeth Institute of Management and Research, New Delhi. We are extremely grateful to have such a distinguished panel of experts joining us today. Proceeding further, I welcome all the participants to this enlightening deliberation and thank you for being interested and putting your time, energy, and efforts into understanding the nuances of this session, while helping us to bring together the practitioners and participants to this course for impactful discussion. Now, without any further ado, let us start the program. It is my honor and privilege to invite Professor Mukul Asherji to start the program with the chair's opening remarks and proceed with the panel discussions. Over to you, sir.
Dhanyavad. I'm grateful to IMPRI for inviting me to this panel discussion. Let me make some brief remarks as chairperson. The way I look at this budget is that it is fiscally prudent, maintains macroeconomic stability. This is very relevant for us, for our credit rating, internationalization, and so on. Yet, it contains many initiatives which will facilitate towards enhancing India's comprehensive national power, CNP. This is a concept that has usually been not discussed in the budget panels that I saw. But CNP is what when we talk about Viksit Bharat goal in 2047, we are trying to achieve this comprehensive national power. I'll elaborate on that little bit, but before that, let me just give some big numbers. A few. The experts will be detailing and explaining them. Nominal GDP in the budget is 326.4 trillion projected for 24-25. And the nominal GDP growth is 10.5%. Now, 326.4 trillion at 82 rupees per USD is 3.98 trillion USD GDP. At 10.5%, using the rule of 72, the nominal GDP will double to USD 7.96 trillion in 6.86 years. Roughly. These are so roughly by 2031, 32, we can expect the um, nearly 8 trillion USD in GDP if we maintain this. If we grow faster, we'll reach there earlier. So it's important to keep these large numbers in mind. I talked about macroeconomic stability. Fiscal deficit is 4.9% of GDP estimated. But an interesting part is that the budget suggests that they would like to move away from fiscal deficit as a target to debt to GDP ratio as a target. I'll leave to Radhika to explain that in greater detail. Now, it's also useful to see as to how do we compare ourselves with other countries. Now, we have GDP per capita in PPP terms of USD 9,712 in 23. If we compare, the nearest Asian country relevant to us is Indonesia. Their uh, uh, is PPP is 14,073. So we are roughly 69% of Indonesia. So the way I would compare India's progress is to compare is, are we catching up with Indonesia? So 69 becomes 75 and so on. So this is one way to try to analyze. Now let's look at the revenue receipts to total receipts. Revenue receipts are 65%, and capital receipts are 35%. That's a bit high, but we are improving. Total expenditure is 48.2 trillion, and that comes to around 34,432 rupees per person. It's also important to have that in mind that the government is spending on each person around 34,000, and the taxes it gets is 27,000. So there is a huge gap between taxes that we pay and the expenditure that we get. Important that to remember that this is a central government budget. If we had state, the tax to GDP ratio may be around 21%. Now, on the infrastructure capital expenditure is 3.4% of GDP by the central government alone. And that is a very healthy way to get comprehensive national power. Now, let me end by first defining what is comprehensive national power. The budget recognizes that GDP is not the sole measure of comprehensive national power. CNP involves economic power, future economic prospects. So, how you get others to perceive that our prospects are good is very, very critical. That's where fiscal consolidation, as part of it, comes in. Hard power, Atmanirbharta in defense, and others. Soft power, technological prowess, degree of Atmanirbharta to be resilient against global and domestic um, uh, the shocks that may occur, like the pandemics and so on, and disinformation, so on, that has been going on. Access to resources. Budget has got on critical mineral resources. They have a special thing on energy, nuclear power that we are trying to do, reduce the our reliance on others, internal stability. This is an area we need to work more. And all of us have responsibility to ensure that we are not part of the problem, but part of the solution in internal stability and speed of decision making. So these are the part. Now, if we look at the priorities and link it to CNP, you will see how the budget, what my theme uh, was. What are the priorities of Viksit Bharat budget says? Productivity and resilience in agriculture. We have got huge agriculture population, improve productivity. If they are not rich, India can't be. So we need to improve their employment and skilling. A lot of very innovative schemes through internships and others on that. Inclusive human resource development and social justice, which involves mainly allocating money to the eastern part of the country, the northeastern part of the country, because that's where the poverty uh, count is high. Inclusive human resource development, social justice, um, manufacturing and services need both. India needs to have you all this debate about manufacturing versus services is dubious. Shows economic ignorance, in my view. Urban development, we have neglected urban areas, but India will be majority urban in not too distant future. Energy security, so that's where nuclear power also comes in. Renewable infrastructure that we had talked about. There's also 1.5 trillion INR to states as long-term interest-free loans for the allocation to infrastructure. Innovation, research, and development, and rural and urban land related reforms. So there will be a land registry that will be very important. The last point is that India is recognizing that our database bases are not as robust as they need to be. We have talked about in many forums before. So there is going to be a data innovation lab that is proposed to be set up to try to address this issue. So this is what if we link these priorities and other initiatives with the definition of CNP, you can see why the budget is aiming at that. And this is the way to try to analyze the budget rather than saying whether I got some tax reduction here or tax increase there or something. That is fine from individual point of view, but that's not how you do national policy. Thank you very much. And now we can continue with Radhika.
Where they have opened it. So, good morning, everyone, and we'll talk about the. From my side, I will focus on some of the key highlights of the budget, the main announcements, as Sir has already laid out, and also focusing a bit more on the fiscal math of the budget, and also how we have changed from the interim budget to full budget. Because in the interim budget, the political landscape was different. In the full budget, the landscape is different. So how, in terms of the budget maths, how the priorities have changed, that would be interesting to look. So those are some of the areas that I will touch upon in the next 10 to 15 minutes. Next slide, please. Yes, so this is the key highlight has been that despite changed political realities and disparate expectations from a number of quarters, the government has retained focus on fiscal consolidation. And in the interim budget, the target for fiscal deficit for the current year was 5.1%. It has been lowered to 4.9% for this year. And it has been made possible mainly from the higher than expected dividends from the RBI. So in the budget, the government had allocated around 1 lakh crore for RBI dividend. It got 2.11 lakh crore, so an additional 1.5 lakh crores fiscal space was created due to this additional bounty. And there was a lot of debate whether the government would try to accelerate its path of fiscal consolidation, or would go in for boosting spending, or would strike a balance between the two. And what we see is that the government has actually struck a balance between the two, and it has focused more on fiscal consolidation. So a big chunk of this RBI dividend has been used towards reducing fiscal deficit, and a part of it has been used towards increasing the revenue expenditure. So precisely rupees 55,000 crore has been in excess of what the revenue expenditure was in the interim budget. So an additional 55,000 crore in revenue expenditure has been allocated in the full year budget. And these are mainly towards productive expenditures like the employment linked incentive scheme that has been announced. So almost rupees 10,000 crore of this increase has been allocated to the new employment-linked schemes, education, education, skilling, and employment. And a part of it has also been allocated towards the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. Rural, especially, has seen a big jump in allocation from FY24. The other key highlight, as Sir pointed out, is that the budget has signaled a move towards a new fiscal framework. Till now, the focus has been on targeting a single fiscal deficit number, looking at fiscal deficit as the key anchor for fiscal policy. This seems to have changed, and beyond FY26, what the government has signaled is that the focus will be on reducing the outstanding stock of debt to GDP ratio. So fiscal deficit would be fixed in a way that the government is able to ensure a reduction in debt to GDP ratio every year. So that's a welcome step, because we are in a situation where now our government bonds are part of the sovereign bond index. And even foreign investors are looking at our fiscal framework. They are looking at a greater transparency in our fiscal mandate. So towards that extent, it's a welcome development, but it needs to be followed with more steps, in terms of articulating what is the glide path. So when the government says reducing the debt to GDP ratio by how much each year, that is something that has to be laid out, maybe through amendments to the FRBM Act. So the intent has been communicated, and it's a welcome step. The next step has to be amendments to the FRBM Act, so that the fiscal framework is transparent, and it would further boost inflows of foreign investments in our sovereign debt, and would help in reducing the cost of borrowing, which is essential for corporate debt as well. Next slide, please. So this is the trajectory of fiscal deficit. The key indicator, we see that during COVID time, the fiscal deficit of the central government skyrocketed to 9.2% of GDP. And since then, we are seeing that it has come down, and 5.1% was the interim budget target. It has been lowered to 4.9% in the for the budget estimate. And for the next year, the government is looking to reduce it even below 4.5% of GDP. Next slide, please. Now, this is an important picture because it shows us how the size of the budget and the composition of expenditure has been changing since the pre-COVID time. So what we see is that during COVID time, there was an increase in total expenditure to GDP, which is a proxy for the size of government budget. And since then, we are seeing, slowly and gradually, broadly, we see a declining trend in the size of the government budget as a share of GDP. And within that, there are interesting reprioritization of expenditures, because revenue expenditures is gradually coming down and capital expenditure is rising. This is for the central government only. And for state governments also, we are seeing that the central government is providing 50-year interest-free loans to state governments to boost their capital expenditure. And while for the current year, the capital expenditure has been pegged at 11.11 lakh crore, what is interesting is that in the interim budget, out of this 11.11 lakh crore, 1.3 lakh crore was allocated to states, and now it is made 1.5 lakh crore. So clearly the stress is on improving the capital expenditure, providing facilitative conditions for states also to boost their capital expenditure. And I think what the government is looking at is around, having another 3% of GDP as capital expenditure from states and the rest from the private sector. We saw in the economic survey that there was a nudge by the chief economic advisor to the private sector to come up and take the baton forward. So I think we have, in terms of capital expenditure, at least in terms of share of GDP, the central government capex might have peaked, and now we may see an increase in absolute level, but may not see an increase in terms of share of GDP. Next slide, please. So this is very interesting to see how there has been a variation from the interim budget to full budget. And here I'll just take a few rows that are worth examining. One, of course, is the fiscal deficit as a percent of GDP, where we see there's a decline from 5.1 to 4.9% of GDP. If we come to the receipts part, the gross tax revenues have been kept more or less same, because if you see on the one side, there has been some rationalization of income tax under the new income tax regime. The slabs have been rationalized. There has been some that will lead to some revenue foregone. But on the other side, the capital gains tax and the equity investments have been increased. And on the corporate tax front, the corporate tax on foreign companies has been reduced. So overall, if we see the impact, it's netting out, the increase is netted out by reduction in the income tax, and therefore overall gross tax revenues are more or less same if we compare the interim and the final budget. But what is interesting is to see the net tax revenue, which is the next row, and there we see a slight reduction from the interim to full budget, which means that the allocation for states have been enhanced from as compared to the interim budget to the final budget. The state's share has been enhanced. Now, this is only in absolute terms. We see that the state's share has been enhanced from 12.2 lakh crore to 12.5 lakh crore. But in terms of their share in overall gross tax revenues, it is still hovering around 35%, in contrast to the 15th Finance Commission's recommendation of 41%. So the rest is accounted for by cesses and surcharges, which are levied by the central government and not shared with the states. So those are some interesting highlights of what changed from the interim budget to the final budget. Next slide, please. Now, this is a snapshot of the change happening from 23-24, that is the last financial year, to this year. And here, one interesting point that I would want to highlight is that if you look at the corporation tax, in terms of the interim budget, if you see the second last column for corporation tax, earlier the government pegged the growth of corporation tax at 14.5%, and now the growth has been pegged at, it has been revised lower to 12%. So that means that the government, as compared to February, in July, the government expects lower collections from corporation tax. And the main reason for that is that in the first quarter, the profits of companies have been lower. So therefore, the projections for corporation tax has been reduced. On the other hand, taxes on income projections have been increased for taxes on income as compared to what was highlighted in the interim budget. Non-tax revenue, there is a big jump, mainly because of the dividend received from the Reserve Bank of India. If we look at the disinvestment proceeds, which kept at the same level, and we don't see much traction happening here, the amount kept is 50,000 crore. similar to what was pegged last year, even though the performance was subpar and the government could manage to garner only around 33,000 crore of the 50,000 crore that was allocated for disinvestment. So on the one hand, on tax revenues, the position has been quite buoyant. Non-tax revenues very good in terms of the dividends and profits. But on the non-debt creating capital receipt, there has been some under achievement on the non-debt capital receipts front. The good point also is that within the revenue expenditure, the subsidies part has been lowered. So there is a lower allocation for subsidies in the FY25 as compared to FY24, which is a welcome development. And we'll see, we have another graph which will show that for each of the major subsidies, the allocation has been lower. Capital expenditure, there's an expectation of a 17% growth over the provisional actuals of FY24. What will be crucial to see is that now we are left with only 8 months of this year, whether the government would be able to absorb the entire, the capital expenditure, because in the first 2 months for which we have the data, capital expenditure was quite muted and understandably so due to the election cycle. So now in the next couple of months, the capital expenditure pace has to get accelerated both from the central and the state government's viewpoint if this target has to be attained, and most probably there would be some savings on this aspect as well. Next slide, please. So in essence, the revenue assumptions look reasonable and achievable. Nominal GDP growth, as Sir also pointed out, is 10.5%. Again, we feel that it's a conservative estimate because it's if we break it down, it assumes a real GDP growth of 7% and a GDP deflator of 3.5%. Now, if we look at GDP deflator, it's a combination of WPI and CPI. And over the last few months, if we look at the trajectory of WPI, it has been picking up. So there is a possibility that there could be overshooting of this target, which will in fact benefit the central government in terms of its fiscal benchmarks, because they are all linked to the nominal GDP growth. Next slide, please. So this is another crucial point about the borrowings, that because the fiscal deficit has been targeted lower, the borrowings are also targeted to be lower. The net market borrowings are expected to be, net debt receipts are expected to be 14.73 lakh crore. What the government is also trying to do is to reduce its reliance on small savings. Now that's again a prudent step, because small savings, the interest cost for the government is higher because it's an administered interest rate scheme. So while there has been a reduction in fiscal deficit, that we don't see a commensurate decline in the government dated securities. What the government has done is that it has reduced its reliance on treasury bills, which is the short-term debt instruments, by 1 lakh crore. But in terms of dated securities, there is only a marginal reduction of around 12,000 crore. And also the reliance on small savings has been reduced. So that will help in rationalizing the cost of borrowings of the central government. Next slide, please. So yeah, so this is just, I wanted to also talk about a bit about the quality of expenditure, that, in terms of the committed expenditure, if we look at the major subsidies, we are seeing a gradual downward trend in terms of food subsidy, fertilizer subsidy. There has been a reduction in allocation for subsidies. So there we do see an interesting reallocation of expenditures. Also, because the focus is now on debt, the government would want to reduce its share of interest expenses as a share of total expenditure, because that is still around 1/4. So if there is a reduction in subsidies, and also if there is a reduction in interest payments as a share of total expenditure, we would see further decline in revenue expenditure, and that would improve the quality of expenditure and will help in bringing down the debt to GDP ratio. I will stop at that. Thank you.
Professor Asar, you have to unmute.
Yes. Thank you, Radhika. That was very, very informative.
Thank you, sir.
If you can send me the slides, that would be helpful.
I will do that.
Anybody has any particular questions for her because she has to leave? Any questions for her? Okay, your presentation was so clear that nobody has any. Okay, from among other panelists, would anybody like to? Okay, thank you, Radhika.
Thank you, sir.
Samkrita, would you like to carry forward? Who is the next speaker?
Professor Reddy, do you want to go first?
Okay.
Okay.
So thank you, IMPRI for inviting me with esteemed panel. I will cover probably basically agricultural sector because little bit of rural development aspects also. Because the background of this budget is that government recognizes that there are a lot of productivity gaps between agriculture and non-agriculture sector. Non-agriculture sector is growing rapidly over the years. Anything problem? Hello?
No, yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Yes. There is, government recognized that there is a huge gap between agriculture and non-agriculture sector productivity growth over the years. And however, population dependent on agriculture is still more than 45-46%. So it's a need of our is to increase productivity. So how we can increase productivity through basically government wants that research and development has to contribute. Research, development and innovation has to contribute to the productivity growth. That's why they want to have a total revamp of the agriculture research system. They gave a lot of emphasis. Priority 1 they have mentioned in the budget. So basically how they will revamp. First of all, the agriculture system itself is mostly government dominated, public dominated. Of course, in the recent years, especially in the seed sector, even private sector is also coming in a big way. But still, most of the research is going on in public sector, as against other developed countries or other even developing countries like other countries. So government want to revamp with the incentives for private sector even to contribute in a big way in agriculture research and development. And also in the background is that there is a growing regional disparities. One is Eastern India is totally lacking in this improved varieties, improved technologies, adoption and all these things, and also rainfed areas. So, and also these rainfed areas and Eastern India, these two are since last 2 to 3 decades, the incomes are farmers' incomes are too much stagnated. Whereas some other western part and southern parts they have their incomes grown very rapidly. Even farmers' incomes grown rapidly, but this Eastern India as well as rain-fed agriculture, there are some problems. So keeping this in view, government also gave a lot of emphasis on pulses and oilseeds. Basically, pulses and oilseeds, they grow mostly in rain-fed areas. So, and also they are deficit because demand and supply projections even by 2030 by Niti Aayog and 2047 again by Niti Aayog shows that we are deficient in both pulses and oilseeds. As on today, we are importing more than say 58% of our domestic consumption of edible oils. And also on and off, we are about 20-30% of pulses consumption we are importing. Pulses are very much important in terms of rain-fed agriculture and rain-fed farmers' incomes and also oil seeds. And again here the yield gaps are very high. So, for example, global yields are say 2 tons per hectare. In India, the average yield is less than 1 ton per hectare. Again, if you see some, the difference between high productive state and low productive states like Chhattisgarh or Eastern India, again, there is a 50-70% gap is there. So there is a need for decreasing the international yield gaps as well as within India regional disparities in yield gaps. So with that focus, the government of India is focusing on pulses and oil seeds. Again, one important thing is that now India is mostly self-sufficient and there is a surplus in most of the commodities. More than 70% of our agricultural production in surplus. Means surplus is about 20 to 30%. So giving this, we have to build our competitive environment. India has to pick and choose some few commodities where it is having a lot of competitive advantage. Like for example, fisheries, aquaculture, we are having a lot of competitive advantage. We are exporting regularly, even rice, some other meat and all these products. So government of India identified this year shrimp farming to big push to shrimp farming in terms of breeder seeds and also total value chain interventions like cold storages, refrigerated facilities, export infrastructure. All these things government have given a special emphasis on shrimp farming to make more competitive in international markets. That is again another priority. Another intervention is natural farming, because over the years our cost of production is increasing. As Madam Radhika Madam mentioned that government of India is spending a lot of money on fertilizer subsidy, basically about 2 lakh crores. Again, so how to reduce this one, the cost of production to the farmers and as well as government subsidy, government burden. So how to reduce that is one way is promoting the natural farming where farmers cannot use both fertilizer as well as other external inputs. So that way government can reduce the subsidy burden as well as farmers' cost of production. So government aimed at creating some natural farming clusters with the use by involving Panchayat Raj institutions and also with the target of 1 crore farmers and enter into this nature farming activities, especially the Indo-Gangetic belt and all, and even rain-fed areas, even tribal areas, hilly areas where, for example, northeastern India already most of the by default farmers are natural, they are practicing natural farming. So giving that priority, it will automatically reduce the cost of production, increase the farmers' incomes and farmers' profitability. And this another emphasis on digital infrastructure. Some states, especially during the last 1 decade or 2 decades, Karnataka experience shows and Andhra Pradesh experience shows this digital infrastructure boosts lot of value addition to the farmers. With the proper digital infrastructure from entire value chain, from providing market infrastructure, information, and which crops they are growing, whether the crop getting average yield or below average yield, whether they know how to enroll into the crop insurance claims, claiming the crop insurance claims, and all these things they need proper digital infrastructure. Now government is focusing, especially the 2 government programs. One is PM Kisan. Every year government is transferring 6,000 rupees per farmer. And again, Prime Minister Fasal Bima Yojana, crop insurance scheme. These 2 are mega schemes government of India is focusing on in the agricultural sector. And also, again, the credit. intervention, interest subvention schemes. These through are big ticket, schemes in agriculture. For example, PM Kisan 60,000, interest subvention again 22,000. Prime Minister Fasal Bima Yojana 14,000. Near about 80% of the budget is for only these three schemes. So this digital infrastructure, the experience shows from the states, especially e-crop system in Andhra Pradesh, and also electronic national agriculture markets in Karnataka and all. So they facilitate very good infrastructure, end-to-end solutions to the farmers from seed to the ultimate, retail segment. They want to link all these things, and also the DBT, and also claims settlements of crop insurance schemes, and also interest subvention schemes. All these things, the backbone should, they want this digital infrastructure. They want to give more emphasis. They have selected some 400 districts for intensive deployment of this digital infrastructure in agriculture sector. Again, another thing is the climate resilient varieties. Last decade, especially, we are seeing a lot of climate variability, droughts, floods, dry spells across India. We are seeing, and ICR, Indian Council of Agriculture Research, they are having a lot of drought resistant varieties, climate resilient varieties, climate resilient technologies with them, and many are in pipeline also. But somehow the link between what lab to land is very much, it's very, these are all complex technologies, not like, one high yielding variety. If you, give to farmers, they will adopt. These climate resilient technologies are very complex technology. There is a lot of implementation problems while diffusing these technologies to the farmers' fields. So they have given a lot of emphasis and lab to land schemes, and also they want to involve all the state governments in implementation of this much wider scale of climate resilient varieties, as well as diffusion of these technologies. These are all some of the things which I want to highlight. And again, this rural development also, they have given a lot of emphasis on, again, similar lines like MG Narega, Gram Sadak Yojana, Women Employment, National Rural Livelihood Mission. But still, the problems are there because the most of the agriculture is a state subject. Although this, then, for example, a lot of schemes government is implementing since last decade. Somehow, some states are implementing little bit, some states are not at all implementing, some states are implementing it in a better way. So there is that, missing links are there between, what government of India is planning, what actual implementation is at grassroots level. Those implementation gaps has to be filled up, and that, digital infrastructure is probably the right way to go to fill that, gaps in implementation. Thank you.
You have to unmute, sir.
Yes.
I'm muting just to make sure other noise don't come in. Professor Reddy, do you think there is any prospect for seaweed? Because the budget says a lot about the agriculture, but also allied sectors.
Yes.
And among the allied sectors, seaweeds, is there a potential for India in that?
I don't know, sir, exactly, but I don't know exactly that, seaweeds. But yes, the growth of allied sectors, for example, crops, cereals, growth is less than 2% per annum. The consumption and all these things, production. Whereas, the meat, milk, animal products, the growth rate is more than 7%.
Okay.
Whereas fisheries, aquaculture growth rate is more than 9-10% over the last in a longer period. Although now they are contributing little to the total agricultural GDP, but there is a lot of scope for both in the domestic market as well as in the export market. But they need very complex technologies. Not like crop technologies, which you give high yielding variety, farmers adapt, farmer yields will be increasing. It is fisheries, for example, fisheries technology is very complex. From once they neglect for 1 month, entire thing will be some pandemic type of thing, some virus, some bacteria will vanish, everything, and they will be in huge losses because they spend more than 5 lakh per acre. Intensive fisheries cultivation, they spend 5 lakhs per per acre. So entire 5 lakhs will be wasted. And in the fisheries also, there is no proper cropping insurance schemes, and it is mostly dominated by the private sector. Private people will provide the seed fish, and also they will buy from the farmers. They will export, they will process and everything. They're highly risky value chains, and some sectors, some districts highly integrated, highly commercialized in a large scale. But in most of the places, fisheries sector is not, I know that somehow, even for example, what is happening is, for example, Odisha, Chhattisgarh, the traditional fisheries are completely going out of the market. Because what happening in Odisha, in Chhattisgarh also, most of the farm ponds or even to village small tanks. Earlier they used to rear fisheries and all these things. Even their rice plantations, rice fields, they used to rear the fish. Now with the adoption of the pesticides, what is happening? The biodiversity within the farm within the rice fields is totally decreasing. And fisheries also, once you adopt these pesticides, chemical pesticides and all these things, you cannot grow the fishes. Even for domestic consumption, they have to buy from the market. Earlier, there used to be a lot of, every week they used to catch fish and they used to cook at least for their own consumption. Now that chances are going out because of this chemical-based agriculture technologies.
Thank you.
Yes.
Anyone has any comments, questions? Thank you, Dr. Reddy. Can we move on?
Yes, sir, sure. Mr. Praveer Deji, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I have a presentation. So, can I?
Sure, sir.
Yes.
Can you see these slides?
Yes.
Okay, good. I will share after the presentation, Dr. Arjun, for circulation. What I'm going to do, Professor Asar and the co-panelists and those who are listening to our conversation and post-budget through social media, what I'm going to do for the next 10, 12 minutes, that I'd like to discuss from the trade and India's international engagements, from that perspective. You have seen that Honorable Finance Minister she has been talking about the Vikshit Bharat 2047. Means by 2047, India would be going to be the developed country in terms of its GDP size. And there are, several strategies, mission, and action plan. All those are being implemented across the country. This budget, I look at it not as an isolated event. It's a continuation of the government's attempt to bring India's GDP from today something around $3.5 trillion American dollar to 30 trillion the dollar. So I have some slide. I'll be presenting what are the basically we are going to do by what we are going to do we are now, and what are some challenges and how those challenges being addressed by the current full budget. We had an interim budget a couple of months back, previous presentation by Professor Pandey, and the opening remarks by Professor Asar have highlighted nicely. So I will be speaking more on the trade and India's international engagements. Look, 30 trillion economy by 2047, that's the target by the Niti Aayog study, and there are several other estimates available. I have given it, I have been, I've given a pre-budget consultation. I made this presentation in different places. So it's basically 30 trillion at the current price, and current dollar is GDP is a 3.42 trillion. If we're going to take 30 trillion, so heavy lifting comes from 10% annual GDP growth, simple arithmetic. And that's what Professor Asar said in his presentation, in his remark, 10% GDP, and it's very simple that 3.42 going to 30, that we have only about 20 years plus 10% annual GDP growth. At the same time, we need in high sources of taxes and non-taxes revenue and falling fiscal deficit. And you have seen Professor Spander's presentation and Professor Asar's remarks that the fiscal deficit at the current moment and subsidies and deficits are declining. It's a very good sign. There's a strong, massive jump is required in the capital expenditure, particularly going to infrastructure building. Infrastructure is a very broad word, but we keep changing. What kind of infrastructure are we going for? If we're going for 30 trillion, our infrastructure by 2047 will be certainly different types than what we have today. So infrastructure is a very broad term, but budgets, annual budget for different plans must be working to talk about the quality infrastructure. That's what. And then the current trade in goods is 1.63 trillion with a 50% openness, trade openness of 50. With a 50% openness, 1.63 trillion is the trade in goods total, India's global trade and services, which needs to be, if we just little bit more, 10% additional openness, 60%, then by 2047, 20 trillion is likely to be our total, trade size. Today it is 1.63, and government has a plan that's going to be a 7 trillion by turn of this decade, etc., etc. So you know that there are challenges that are very different, and how are we going to address? These are the mandate, these are the targets through the budget and successive budgets, henceforth. But I keep you, as I said, that I will be bringing the discussion in the more from the trade perspective, and what I did just with the latest data. If you put it the GDP and the trade, a very simple positive relation, that if we higher the GDP, it's going to lead to higher trade, subject to some other conditions. The pull factors, that's what, because India's is an emerging market, it's a developing world, it's going to be a developed country, so there will be a pull factors always for in case of an India. And exports, for example, that 7 trillion GDP, 7 trillion global exports by turn of this decade requires more import, and protection is not the way forward. Don't you think that these are the three things? I presented in pre-budget, and I think the Honorable Finance Minister's presentations actually highlighted some of them, that production is not the way forward because there's anti-production sentiment everywhere in the world, so also in the country. Exports require more imports, means if we import more, this import duty is less, this is going to help our foreign market, the backward linkages more. And the pull factors means you strengthen your connectivity initiatives with the partners, trade partners. So these three things, I think, interchangeably I have highlighted in different ways in the budget. And some numbers like, what are our choices for going for 2047? Current, our top 10 trade partners is China, which is about 10%. America is about 10%. Middle East and the Gulf is 7%. The Russians are 6%, so on and so forth. So it's the top 10 partners, and they are scattered all across the world. So not region specific. So India's choice, to support or facilitate trade is that it has to support all around trade facilitation or transportation like that, not as region specific. That's what. And if you look at its distribution, goods and services, And if you leave out a 23, 24, that is because of some crisis in the shipping channels, some crisis in the worldwide. There's a slight decline from 1.674 trillion to 1.6, slight decline, as I said, because of global crisis on different sub-regions, different regions, as well as on the shipping across. So that's why there's a fall, but this is a very seasonal, I think. So way forward towards 2047, we need to look at more closely the value chains, way towards India's rising exports. Services trend will be more because with GDPs, there's structural changes happening. 2047 means almost about a 60 to 70 to 80% of the GDP size will be contributed by the services sector. There is, strong need for digital technology, technological transformation happening rapidly, and we see very strong servicification, the goods getting translated into services industries, and first-class transaction in the sense that we need many faster airlines. So Boeing company, Airbus companies, they are busy in coming out with the faster airlines. There are many faster air cargos, shipping cargos by, several shipbuilders across the world, particularly the Korean. Faster payment system, the digitals. These are the faster airlines, faster air cargos, ocean cargo, faster payment. These are, very much there in the system, and this will get a high momentum as we go along. Plus, we need to strengthen exports. The quality of FTAs are also getting transformed into different, high varieties in the form of SEPA, SECA, or ECTA, where we see more quality free trade agreement and more from the point of view of the business. Earlier, lots were more about a strategic, but here the strategic interest will be there, but more about the quality aspects for the trade, and particularly exports and facilitation of the exports, so on and so forth. And we see the bigger export partners, since our trade partners are floated all across the world. India's with the trade with America, with the European Union, China, and ASEAN, there will be more India's trade, in the coming years. So these are some of my observations in 2047. But let me put you in the kind of trade we have, and this diagram, which is drawn from OEC, is that basically, still we are what we export, we means India, and what we import. There is a kind of a loop between export and import, and very integrated. Like, we import lots of crude, we export refined petroleum. We import lots of coal that goes into feeding into petroleum refineries, our thermal power plant, etc., etc. But if you leave out our primary goods, the minerals, etc., India's exports are getting transformed into a sort of, and I'll say that more on secondary and tertiary sectors, more into value chains, both in the forward and also in the backward linkages. Like, we see, if you go by the export one, we see more into the pharmaceuticals products, more into electrical and electronics. These are value-wise still far behind the China, but there is some transformation happening. So this is, I see, that this is an opportunity, and we need to diversify from the narrow baskets more into a broader out. And what's exactly playing so far is diversification or sophistication, in a very broad way. Basically, India's trade facilitation, which is driven by the digital strength, and the global even trade facilitation survey indicates, almost about a 93.55% in 2023. India's trade facilitation is remarkable achievement, more into paperless, contactless, faceless kind of arrangements. But these statements are, again, I've been telling in a very general way. I think my time is up. That's what I'm getting. Some WhatsApp message, is it? No, still there is some time, and I'll be able to close it in next 5 minutes. But the India's crisis, India hasn't done much. This is part of the cross-border part of it. Means India's trade facilitation, transportation, between India and the state partners, not done yet. And that's why the cross-border paperless trade achievements are relatively low. What about the hard infrastructure? I put a couple of things in a one slide like this. If you go and if you look at very carefully that what India is actually doing, India is heavily engaged in the post-COVID to strengthen its global linkages and to avoid some of the shipping challenges is happening in the Red Sea or the falling water level in the Panama Canal, and the excessive cost of ocean transportation going by, Cape of Good Hope or rising in freight. So what India is doing in response to that, it is, strengthening its international infrastructure connectivity projects like INSTC, the new one like IMEC, or the one which is there with the Russians like, EMC, like Eastern Mediterranean Corridor, so on and so forth, also the sub-region, bringing several, ports like Chabahar and different parts across the world, development of the port terminals with the private sector, port development in Myanmar, like that. To discuss about such detail, it will take time. So what my purpose is that this is to show you that a kind of kind of transformation happening in the mega corridors. And plus there are projects like undersea cables, energy exchange and pipelines, India's strength in the renewable energy, air cargo logistics hub. Those are some of the projects supported by India, but they behave as a regional public goods, a global public goods. The air cargo logistics hub are basically used not only by the Indian exports, these are also used by Bangladesh. Renewable energy, there are used facilities like International Solar Alliance projects by the many multilateralized by India's initiative, like so and so forth. So is this budget going to address some of our interests? Before that, I'd like to tell you there is a project India's implemented with Iran. It's called the Chabahar, very strategic location. There are Chabahar is basically giving a boost to India's link with Central Asia, also with our project like INSTC, and there are running projects in the Chabahar, the container terminal, multi-purpose terminal. In the last financial year, Chabahar received from the union budget 100 crores as a grant. And as a matter of fact, this is the port. This is a kind of a lagoon, kind of an impounded. But all these white cranes, the Ganti cranes are provided by India. This port is being run by a public sector company called IPGL, which is an offshoot of a Kuntal port. Last year, it has handled 60,000 container box, the general cargo of 1.9 million tons. There is a SEZ, special economic zone, coming in the backyard, and there is a project being discussed to link the Chabahar part with Afghanistan, as well as without Afghanistan going into Central Asia. Like, is this project is got something in this project? I will give the answer to that. And before that, just to conclude from what's India's journey to 2047, what we need in the short to medium term, we need to strengthen our trade agencies. By the way, trade agencies like the DGTR, DGCIS, and there are several other trade agencies. We need to overhaul them. Otherwise, this bureaucracy is important, but it should not be that great initiatives is actually spoiled by, the bureaucratic hurdles, basically. So duties for us that euphoria is good, but move from there support towards the 20 trillion our trade size by 2047 to 30 trillion GDP. That kind of an overhauling is required. Point number 2 is momentum must continue through digitalization process, like trade in local currency, payment through the digital mode, like India-Singapore model. FTAs need to have more resources to borrow the technology, not just trade in goods and duty concession. It should be beyond. That's what we see in the Australia or India UAE. This government has done in that way phenomenally well in terms of strengthening the quality infrastructure, quality FTAs like that. No compromise with the WTO's multilateral rules regulation important to support any kind of, be it bilateral or regional free trade agreement. The global rules and regulations should not be tampered in. And India has an added role because India is a founder member of the WTO. Protect and reward our exporters. That doesn't mean the subsidy. And that's what we see in the budget. There is a kind of a reform that assisting our exporters, giving them some support, but not in the form of a direct cash transfer. That's the point. Remissions is presently done, but I think there is a kind of move from PIL to EIL, if I am correct. Development of industrial park and economic zones, more and more plug and pay kind of thing. That's what we see. This budget, more corridors, ports, shipping, connecting India to the emerging markets, and then some of our districts, need to be connected to the trade promotion, even the districts are not yet. So I'm talking about the district level trade promotion unit. And there are non-negotiable tasks like, infrastructure building, mutual recognition agreement, standards, regional trade in the local currency, etc., etc. I've also proposed in the pre-budget discussions in some forum that we need to have a JETRO-like trade promotion body in external form. Maybe this is too early to comment. And strengthening Indian missions. This budget has highlighted more, actually, the EMEA's account. And the strategic trade from, which is engaging state in the export and import directly, northeastern part of India, which Professor Asar was talking with more with the BBIN, etc., etc. So these are some of the things doable. Last slide, what we have seen in the budget. Basically, if I may put it in the trade aspect, there are four, key areas that are highlighted. One is infrastructure development. Second is support to MSMEs. Third is trade facilitation, trade digitalization, and the GVC participations. When I put it, some of the measures in these four categories. But let me, tell something that in the budget, there is a steep cut in the basic custom duty, which will lead to encourage a trade and production networks, so GVC participation. Some futuristic idea about that self-certification in the certificate of origin. As you know that all the FTA partners, because of digital applications, we don't seek any more, print copies of the certificate of origins. We don't seek, many of the, custom officers, they don't require those are in the print form. So self-certification, digital is very important. And when we go for, the single window customs, we need to have from your all trade partners, starting with the FTA partners, to respect their, certificate of origin. That's it. India has done during the COVID time. This is the online submission, but now it is going to be multilateral. Very, very innovative way that has been, highlighted by in the budget. Of course, there was a request from several trade bodies to the Ministry of Finance that this is the time has come that we need to pick it up. Plus, rising capital expenditure in the infrastructure development, which is going to create in jobs. First speaker, Professor Pandey, has highlighted more and more. I'm not going to discuss that. Bringing MSMEs, I see the credit guarantee scheme for MSMEs going to cover the 100 crore. Credit guarantee in MSMEs is going to directly feed into exports. Plus the Mundra loan, just without collateral, 10 lakhs to 20 lakhs. Well, the 10 lakhs, there's high non-performing assets, by the way. Most of the MSMEs, they borrow 10 lakhs from the bank, and they don't, they don't repay. I've checked with the one bank. But here government comes, on their behalf, because government giving them the guarantee. But there are issues. But that 10 lakhs to 20 lakhs is a good effort, helping from the trade perspective. If our small, tiny exporters going to do, exporting from the Mundra loan is going to help them. Plus e-commerce exports hub, TDS TAD deduction of sources for the e-com operator reduced from 1% to very negligible 1%. Huge support. Corporate tax for the foreign companies brought down to 35%. So e-commerce, export hub in the PPP mode, there's certainly good initiatives. As in the project, in the budget also, we have seen the plug and play industrial parks, and 12 such parks are going to be approved in the National Industrial Corridor. There are 12 National Industrial Corridors, so 12 parks, 6 industrial corridors, and there are 12 parks to be located. This will certainly kickstart the manufacturing process, It's a very important sanction, very important initiative in the budget. Plus critical mineral to get processing, recycling, overseas acquisition has received boost in the budget. Government has eliminated tariff on almost all the critical minerals. Support for the skilling, 1,000 ITIs will get supports for the skilling. Because if we go for e-commerce exports hub, or if we go for industrial corridors, if we go for MSME support, we need a skill supply. That's what the government has done. Government has also scrapped 2% equalization levy on the foreign digital farming during the during the post-COVID. This was imposed by government as a kind of a tit for tat or retaliation for anti-trade initiative by the Americans. But this has been now removed. Shipping Ministry in particular, has received a higher allocation, but with the MRO in focus, maintenance, repair, and operation services. This is a very, very, rightly move. Simple, very simple tax regime for the foreign cruise operators in India. Leasing ships made very simple from the gift city in Ahmedabad. There is an initiative, clean energy gets good boost, transition towards our climate change, towards net zero mandates. Last but not the least, I have seen that MES budget has actually increased from what we had in the last year to 22,154 crore in 2024-25. There was a last plan outlay was 18,050 crore. So 5,600 crore additional allotment, the MEA. And those are going to, India's neighborhood first policy to support. And Chabahar Port, as I said in my presentation, this time also got 100 crore. So overall, what we have seen that this budget is not an isolation of the previous one as going to be. It's a journey towards the Viksit Bharat 2047, and this budget is going to support India's journey. Thank you very much, Professor Asar and others for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I would like to invite Professor Mukul for his remarks.
Unmute.
Sir, may you please unmute?
This was very comprehensive and constructive. Sorry. Sorry about it. Very constructive presentation. Please send me your presentation. I think, we need to now create some dashboards and some benchmarks of progress as we move towards 2047 in the external sector as well as the agriculture and other sectors. So it would be useful to try to, the researchers could try to focus on what sort of a dashboard, key performance indicators, others that would make sense for the country. So I think I'm trying to think about some on the fiscal side, but I think it's also important for sectoral trade, agriculture, manufacturing, services side as well. But this was very helpful, and I think I'm glad that our trade and commercial policy is getting strategic thrust, which was lacking before, thanks to a lot of research done by you, RIS, other organizations. Thank you. Okay, who will be the next one?
So Yaminiji has not joined, so we can have some discussion if you want.
Okay, would anybody like to start, have the questions and so on? Who wants to start? Maybe Arjun, you can start asking question and then we'll have other people follow you.
Sure, sure. So, but before that, if any of the participants want to ask anything, right now is the time. Okay, so let me ask this question from Radhika ma'am. Ma'am, how do you see that when we go to Viksit Bharat, and as Professor Day also highlighted 30 trillion, all the expectation. What are the expectations from direct and indirect taxes? What will be the proportion at that time? And how do you see that happening?
So thank you. I think we have to augment our tax to GDP ratio to a higher level, and that has to come through rationalization and simplification of taxes. One of the key things that is on the agenda is the GST rate rationalization, which the finance minister did mention that the next plank of reform has to focus on GST rate rationalization. Even at NIPFP, there has been a lot of research, on what should be the rate slab structure, because we have these 4-5 taxes. So, what is the proportion of revenue that is coming from various taxes? For example, what comes from 12%? How much is the revenue coming from 18%, 28%? So, based on that, there has been some recommendation on rationalization of taxes, that maybe that 5% can be made into 8%, and the 12 and 18% can be clubbed into a 15% tax, and the 28% should remain. So this is one proposition, this is one formulation, but it will require more of such background research to see that how we can progress towards making the GST rate rationalization more effective. The other important reform agenda on the tax front is addressing the inverted duty structure, which is plaguing a lot of sectors, and the government did point out their reform priority in terms of addressing the structural issues in the form of inverted duty structure. So I think that is important, and reducing the compliance burden, reducing the disputes, bringing petroleum, again very controversial, but how to ensure that petroleum and other fuels are brought under GST. So all these, there's a long way to go, but I think there is a medium-term agenda towards simplification, rationalization of taxes, and also increasing the tax to GDP ratio so that our revenues can be augmented towards supporting the goal of Viksit Bharat. On the other side, rationalization of expenditure is also on the agenda, as we have seen. Interest expenditures, the government is looking at reducing interest burden, and that is why we have seen that the fiscal framework has also signaled a shift from just focusing on fiscal deficit to debt to GDP ratio. So these are some of the areas through which the government can try to reform the fiscal framework to support the revenue requirements of a Viksit Bharat. Thank you.
Right. Ma'am, as you have also highlighted, the welfare expenditure has been rationalized. So how do you see in going forward towards developed India? All the developed economy do spend a lot. Do you think that we move from the very targeted poor driven welfare agenda to some universal kind of coverage? Or we are going to be more selective in that as we go and maybe for health insurance, universal health coverage or other kind of coverage? How do you see our welfare expenditure going forward?
So I think there have been lots of demands about this, income transfer, universal income transfer and all. But as of now, I don't see the fiscal space for a universal income transfer, given that the government is already providing free food to 80 crore people, and there is, agriculture, the farmers handout of 6,000 per annum. There is PM Kisan. There was the MSPs have also been increased on most of the crops on which the MSP is levied. So I don't think with these kind of support measures, the focus would be on targeting the vulnerable group rather than having a universal income scheme, because for that we do not seem to have the fiscal space, given that our debt to GDP ratio is still elevated. We are at the lowest rung of the investment grade in the credit rating, sovereign credit rating agencies. So there has to be a balancing act between moving prudently and also ensuring that there is a targeted approach towards addressing the burning problems, and towards that what government is trying to do, the employment scheme, the support towards MSMEs, the slight rationalization of income taxes. So I think through those measures, the government is trying to lift consumption levels directly and indirectly, rather than going towards a universal income transfer. That doesn't seem to be the priority of this government as of now. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Adhika, if I recall, in some of the after budget statements, it has been mentioned that a direct tax code committee has been formed, which will report in the next 6 months. So we will see some major changes in the code itself, which is 1961, as amended and has become outdated.
Correct.
I hope that happens as well.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. I have one question to Professor Reddy also. Professor Reddy, the inflation, especially food inflation, comes in the news again and again, and MSP and all. How do you see this budget tackling this issue, especially in the monsoon? The prices of vegetables and essential items are very high. So do you see any approach as we go forward to tackle inflation, especially food and agriculture related stuff?
So in the long run, the food inflation, the only solution is increasing productivity of all these crops. But in the short run, for example, pulses inflation is going up and down. There is a lot of fluctuation, and also production is also having a lot of fluctuations, especially pulses and oil seeds. We are importing a lot of about 50-60% of edible oils. So we are not having that much fluctuation in the prices. But where this our pulses area, especially the pulses and tomato, onion, and potato, these three commodities, they call top tomato, onion, and potato. So these are all like perishable commodities where we are having a lot of high fluctuation in the prices as well as high inflation rates over the years. Of course, this production supply side interventions already government is taking care. The market intelligence and value chain creation, cold chains, and also that there will be disparities in temporal and spatial variation in the prices will be reduced over the years. But ultimately, it has to come from the supply side. There is a need for push. Basically, that's why Government of India initiated this the pulses and national pulses and oil seeds mission in this budget. They want to give a lot of emphasis, and ultimately it is also having social implications because pulses and oil seeds they grown in the rain-fed areas. Again, in this budget, vegetable clusters, actually around urban centers, they want to come out with some creating some vegetable clusters. For example, Delhi, we are having Safal value chain. You all know that Delhi, every colony there are some Safal retail centers, and these vegetables are coming around Hyderabad or around Delhi 100-150 kilometers, and overnight they are coming actually. So harvested in the villages about 7-8 o'clock in the evening, 6-7-8 o'clock, and morning by morning 4-5 o'clock they will be all cleaned and everything. The pre-processing will be done at Safal centralized processing unit, and by 4-5-6 o'clock all the retailers, Safal retailers. So that type of structure government wants to create in Hyderabad, Bangalore, and all these places, so that vegetable inflation will be in control. There will be a planning for production. Basically, it's a public-private partnership mode, and this type of things has to come in other areas. But vegetables and fruits, they are the entry points. Over the years, we are seeing these farmers producer organizations, cooperatives and all these things. So agriculture has to be organized sector within at least FPOs, semi-organized type of thing. Then only we will control. There will be some control over the supply chains. Then there is some control on inflation, food inflation. Of course, MSP again, as Madam already mentioned, MSP even paddy and rice, paddy and wheat. We are having practicing open-ended procurement. It is about 3 to 4 times what we require. We are procuring, and there is a lot of wastage in storages. There are logistic costs and all these things. And when we, for example, when we procure at 20 rupees per kg, the logistic cost and all these things coming to 35 rupees per kg, because government is inefficient businessman. So the logistic costs are too high. Again, they have to auction these food grains, excessive food grains in open market. And when this open market, because the cost for the government is 35 rupees per kg, whereas the international price is only 20 rupees per kg or 26 rupees per kg. So inherently 10 rupees excessive cost government is bearing. That is lost to the government because of this open-ended procurement. Of course, government of India started procuring this year onwards most of the pulses. Wherever they grow, they want to procure. But again, it's a very costly affair. For example, paddy, if you want to procure in a particular village, at least they will get 10 tons of paddy. But if you want to go and procure pulses, there is no scale. Pulses production is very scattered and thin across all the villages, and there are some 12, 13 types of pulses. Whenever the seasonality is there, some season only 1 or 2 produced, 1 or 2 harvests are there. So government cost of logistic cost going to the remotest places and procuring 1 or 2 bags only, not 5-6 tons. So that is all huge logistic cost. Of course, price deficiency payment. The government wants to introduce this price deficiency payment scheme, which earlier Madhya Pradesh government is already implemented. But again, there are so many implementation issues in the price deficiency payments. Of course, as on today, this MSP for 23 commodities, but only paddy, wheat, sugarcane to some extent, and cotton to some extent, they are procuring. For remaining all 19-20 commodities, it's a signal price. Government, increasing every year some 10% MSP. That is acting as a signal price to all these commodities, and prices more or less, in line with the 10% deviation from the signal price. Many times what is happening, even though there is a scarcity in the local market, that Harathirias and traders, commission agents, they are colluding together. They are making that prices are below the MSP, not the above MSP. So that type of anomalies are going on because the government capacity at village level, at remote places are very less, and they cannot procure, they cannot dictate any private agency to do procure also. So these are some of the implementation issues.
Professor Reddy,
Yes.
I agree that supply side is very important
Yes.
in tackling this issue.
Yes.
But I also feel that the households and the consumers should also have some appreciation of principle of substitution.
Yes.
In other words, you can't expect that I can get tomatoes or whatever off season at the price that they prevail in when the season is there.
Yes.
So you try to change some of your food habits also.
Yes. Right.
Price is high. So I mean, so right now the household expectation is that my tomatoes, potatoes, onions, everything should be same price throughout the year.
Yes.
It's not possible.
Yes.
You got to learn also how to substitute the relatively cheaper items for relatively expensive ones, which means you have to change your habits too. And how do we educate households to do that rather than expectation? And this is coming from the overdue emphasis we have in the country on rights and no emphasis on duties.
Yes.
Okay. There are with every right, there is a commensurate duty you have to perform. So you also have to be intelligent consumer.
Yes,
You can't expect that government will
yes,
provide you tomato at the same price in monsoon season that will be there in the non-monsoon season.
yes. And another thing, sir, for example, in pulses, whenever there is a shortage, whenever prices goes beyond say 150 rupees per kg, immediately government comes and put lot of restriction on exports and free imports. So much of variation in government policy regarding duties, import ban, etc. For example, last 5 years, you can take in every there may be some 30-40 changes in the government policy regarding the import and export policy because they want to favor the consumers. Whenever their prices increases like say 100 rupees or 150 rupees, they want to favor the consumer, so the prices should go down below 100 rupees so that it is affordable to the consumers. On the other hand, even farmers has to take advantage of 150 rupees, 200 rupees in an export market. When they are getting 200 rupees in export market, why we have to put export ban during that particular period?
That is where the supply side comes in.
Yes, yes.
Improve productivity,
Hmm.
improve our production, supply, reduce consumption, demand supply gap, and
Yes,
all that comes in.
yes,
But my point was that the consumer must also
yes, yes,
uh, purchase intelligently,
yes, yes, right.
must have some understanding of
Yes, yes.
economics.
Mhm.
Okay. Yes, any other question?
Right. I can ask one to Professor Day. Yes, Professor Day, you mentioned about trade and trading partners as well. How do you see going towards Viksit Bharat? What are the key priority areas in trade or investment our country is seeking for? Also looking into our Atmanirbhar focus in defense production and some key areas. We have PLI schemes and other. How do you see investment and this trade facilitation going on, and which can be our key partners or sectors?
Well, Dr. Arjun, I mean, this is to answer this. Then I need to come out from the budget. The first is that, as I said in my presentation, that we are for the Viksit Bharat 2047, 30 trillion GDP and 20 trillion the total trade. And trade facilitation is very important in way to gain 30 trillion, 20 trillion total trade. So what government has been doing in a very planned way. One is the soft aspect of trade facilitation. And I can go on talk about those in going in the details, but I let me only cite some of the examples. If you look at an authorized economic operators, AEOs in short, all our trade partners, particularly the big one, the top 10, they all agreed to AEOs program. They are also having an AEOs. We are also having an AEOs. So our authorized economic operators, basically, who are handling our international trade, they speak to there because they are recognized, kind of an acknowledgement by our trade partner. This is one. Point number two, the member countries of the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement. As you have seen my presentations, India has done quite well in terms of its soft aspects, particularly paperless trade, contactless, very faster trade, but lots more to be done. So, but there is a good attempt, India as well as by the major trade partners. Trade is something, the trade facilitation is something that both countries have to be, at par. If India does a very good in trade facilitation, but its importers are still in age-old days, then it won't help our actually exports, because as soon as it goes there, it faces lots of additional costs, which is actually killing in that way, or kill the competitiveness which we gain for a faster trade facilitation from the exporting side, country side. But for FTA partners, for example, India has accepted that in the budget, the self-certification or certificate of origin for all FTA partners. That's very good, because certificate of origin is being submitted through the single window. And now self-certification is very important. a very important move. So there are many things, many important initiatives by government on the trade facilitation. But if you look at side by side, because trade facilitation primarily we talk about standards issues, NTM issues, NTBs issues, tariff, etc., soft aspect. But if you look at the big crisis is in the hardware aspect, for which that's what I made a presentation. One slide was on the corridors. Today, because of the crisis of the Red Sea, our exports can cross the Suez Canal. It all the way to go to South Africa, and which is 300, 400 years earlier arrangements. So for which we are paying more time, more costs. And every day, if you see in our dailies in the front page, these are being highlighted. 40 to 60% rise in the ocean freight rate, simply. Plus, on top, there are concessions. Because if there are shortest route, if we don't follow, if we go for longest route, our vessels are actually stuck. They're taking more time in the ocean, than at the port. So congestion of the port, non-availability of the containers, freight rate is high. Those are really killing is actually our exports. And that's why, government is looking for an alternate trade routes, and there are many attempts. If you come to the investment, this is where, I think I look at more investment more from the point of view of your strategic areas. Plus, if our, manufacturing or services are connected with, value chains. This budget talks about, e-commerce export processing zone, and the government has given incentives for it in terms of tax deduction for the services operators, etc. This is a good initiative, to bring the services investment under Mode 3. I'd say more and more investments will be coming in the services sectors, particularly those who are operating in the export processing zone or SEZs and free trade areas or economic zone like that. But bulk chunk of the investment should also come to our areas, the new areas like semiconductors, like which is we expect more, but there must be some attempt, because this budget I see government has reduced the tariff for all our minerals mostly, which are going to feed into industries like a semiconductor, which basically going to feed into several other sophisticated equipment or the manufacturing process like automobiles, mobile phone, like that. So there is some attempt to it, and hopefully the more we do the internal reform, more we take strategic decisions, investments on those areas will be more and more in coming days. So Arjun, Dr. Arjun, this will be my very short and little broad, or you can call it a vague statements answering to your important questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Professor, would you like to give your concluding remarks? We are good at time. We can wrap up.
Participants don't have any comments or questions?
No, not yet.
Okay. Thank you again to IMPRI for organizing this seminar. We have had a fairly broad-ranging discussion with a lot of themes and details that have come up. So this set of presentations by everyone gives us an indication of how to analyze a budget. And it's only the budget has got so many documents. We have only covered really very, very small part of it. And it requires real expertise to sort of wade through the details of the budget. So we have gotten a lot of insights this morning from the various experts, and I have learned a lot from them, and the discussion and their presentations. So, dhanyavad again. And we hope that we can continue these high quality discussions in the coming period. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Arjun.
Thank you.
Thank you. Samprikta, quickly, vote of thanks.
Yes, sir. As we come to the end of today's discussion, I, Samprikta Banerjee, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI, Center for the Study of Finance and Economics, CSFE. I would like to thank all of you for attending today's deliberation, a panel discussion on New India's Economic Transformation and Union Budget 2024-25, as a part of IMPRI 5th Annual Series of Thematic Deliberations and Analysis of Union Budget 2024-25. We are grateful to our chair for the session, Professor Mukul Ji, and to our esteemed panelists, Professor A. Amarendra Reddy Ji, Dr. Radhika Pandey Ji, Professor Prabir De Ji, and Professor Yamini Agarwal Ji for taking part in the discussion and enlightening us. We also thank Dr. Arjun Kumar Ji for raising pertinent questions and participating in today's deliberation and carrying the discussion forward. We are grateful if you are watching us later on our YouTube channel or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publications. We hope you continue to join in future to our IMPRI Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning. Wishing you a good day ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.